Yo guys, I hope you're doing super well, and first things first, I hope you all had a very good Christmas and a happy new year. But look, let's get straight back into it, from where we left off on the channel. I know I haven't uploaded over the Christmas period, as I'm sure you can understand, but I want to get back into it, a video every other day, and to kickstart 2020 off. I wanted to record this video, which is a very highly requested video, which is basically sales and kind of how to go about sales for your online marketing agency. It's a topic that I don't cover often, but obviously it's a topic that is a very important one when you're running a an agency, or more specifically an e-com agency like myself, and I know a lot of you guys out there are as well. As always guys, just before we jump into the video, make sure you smash the like button. Really does help with the channel and the YouTube algorithm, all that kind of stuff. And also leave a comment down below and tell me where you're at currently with your agency, and where you want to scale it to, because I'm super interested to see where you guys are at. Look guys, let's get straight into it. As I say, I want to cover sales in this video, and like I said before, it's a topic that's very important when you're running an agency. It's a big aspect of the agency, but I feel like definitely for myself and a lot of other people, it's a topic that doesn't get covered too much. Hence why I wanted to cover it in this video. So first things first, when it comes to sales, okay, is sales, it often gets overlooked as this really big thing, but basically, breaking it down to its most granular level, all sales is it's human to human, person to person interaction. And you've got these sales tactics and big sales secrets, and I'm sure that's probably what most of you guys wanted to get from this video. But kind of a news alert, I'm not going to be showing any secret tactic or anything like that. Obviously, I'm going to be providing a lot of tips and things to think about. But breaking it down to its most granular level is it's human-human interaction. A big lesson that I learned actually from a friend of mine who is in the golfing industry. He plays golf with like billionaires and whatnot, so obviously he gets a lot of big tips from these big billionaires and millionaires and whatnot. CFO of Apple has played golf with him, so pretty big guy. And one of the most valuable tips that I've picked up from him is, when it comes down to it, okay, so, a perfect example, it's for any industry, but specifically for social media marketing and SMMA. One of the biggest things, that I always overlooked when I started out, and, something that probably most of you guys do, is you've done the meeting, you've set the meeting, you've gone through the meeting, and then you've got a contract sat there for $3,000, right? A mindset thing that I used to have, and I'm sure most of you guys used to have, is you want to get that contract signed, right? And it sounds pretty obvious, like, yeah, I want to get the contract signed. You want to get that $3,000 contract signed. But if you break it down a little bit, who's signing the contract, right? The contract isn't going to sign itself. Who's signing the contract? It's another human, right? It's another person. And I mean, that might sound not very, you might be like, yeah, obviously, but when you think about it, and when I really sat down and thought about it, it was kind of a breakthrough moment for me. And it's another person who's signing the contract. You don't want to sell the contract. The contract doesn't, it does mean something, but it doesn't mean anything in the grand scheme of things. It's another person who's signing the contract, so you need to sell the person, right? Like I say, all comes back down to the most granular level of sales, which is human to human interaction. Okay, so that's the first thing. There's a lot of people who say there's big, tips and tricks and secrets and all that kind of stuff. But as I say, breaking it down to its most granular level is human to human interaction. Now, in order to be successful at that human to human interaction, that's where the scripts come into play. That's where the strategy and the overall strategy of the meeting comes into play. But you've always got to have that in the back of your mind, that it's just another human that you're speaking to, and you need to sell them. You don't sell the contract or the service. You need to sell the person, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who's going to get their card out. They're the ones who needs to sign the contract. They're kind of the ones behind the meeting going successful or not. So going into a little bit more detail in terms of sales as a whole, I just wanted to get that initial point out the way, just so you're always thinking about that, because that's one of the biggest tips that I can give. But look, going into what I'm sure most of you guys really want to get out of this video is kind of my sales strategy, if you like. When I started out, I had a killer script that I, constantly tested, constantly refined, and it signed me a lot of deals, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 deals. That said, I still use that same script, but I don't use it word for word. And as I'm sure, most of my four-week mentorship students know, obviously I give you guys that exact meeting script that I literally used to sign 3, 4, and still to this day sign $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 clients. But I don't follow that same script word for word. It's a killer script to use when you're starting out. But obviously now that I've had so many meetings and whatnot, I don't use it word for word. However, what I go by now and what I kind of follow now is more of a structural based meeting strategy. So what I mean when I say that is that I've kind of got 4 points that I want to hit in the meeting. And kind of if I hit those 4 points, then I've done what I need to do on my end for the meeting. That's kind of how I look at it. Now the 4 points, the 4 tips, I call them like phase 1, 2, 3, and 4. And it's kind of a sequential sequence that I take each and every client through in the meeting, because it starts it's in chronological order. Obviously when you're starting out, you don't want to go for the close, so you need to build up to the close, and obviously the close is the 4th phase. So you need to do a few things to build up to that, and that's what I wanted to really kind of cover in the video. So the first phase is kind of if you want like the digging phase, if you like, that's where we want to really try and figure out the business's numbers, what their numbers they're doing, kind of where they're at currently, where they want to get to, what their profit margins are like, what they're currently spending, what they're currently making, all that kind of stuff. That's where you want to get those numbers out the way, so then you've got more context going into the meeting further, going deeper into the meeting. Now, once again, if you are one of my students, obviously you will know that I use a scheduling software, and I actually ask questions when a client goes to schedule a call with me, there is some mandatory questions that they need to answer before they can actually schedule the call. And I've actually got a lot of those questions in that scheduling, for them to schedule the call, I've got a lot of those questions there. So already, before I even get into the call, I've already kind of gone through that digging phase, if you like. So that's a really good way to go into the call with a lot of context, because when I go into the call, I already know how much they're currently making. I already know, where they want to get to. I know what they're currently spending on ads and all that kind of stuff. So that really helps kind of shorten the length of time that I need to spend in the meeting, kind of figuring out where they're at and whatnot, because I've already got that information from the scheduling when they scheduled the initial call with me. Moving along into sort of the phase 2 of the meeting, this is where you need to start touching a little bit more on the emotional side. So this is where, going back to that famous kind of sales quote, is that, everybody buys with emotion and then justifies with logic. So obviously if you don't know that quote, it's kind of a sales tactic, if you like, that everybody kind of follows. Buy with emotion, justify with logic. So in the sales meeting, you want to follow that. You're not gonna, this is what I mean, going back to the chronological order in the sales meeting. Everybody buys with emotion, then they justify with logic. So you don't want to first go logical and then go emotional, because it goes completely against what the buyer dynamic is often referred to, which is, once again, buy with emotion, justify with logic. So you want to follow that same order. So the next kind of phase is we're going to touch on the emotional side of it, because people buy with emotion, then they justify with logic. So we need to touch on the emotional side of it, and that's kind of more, kind of buttering up their ego a little bit. It's that more of emotional side. You want to maybe explain what they could do with that extra money. Now this, if you're working with a smaller brand, this definitely works. You could kind of mention how they could take their family on more holidays, or they could maybe buy that car they've always wanted to with the extra money that they generate from your advertising, right? That's kind of the emotional side. That said, if you're working with bigger companies, they don't really care about the extra car that they could buy, because they've probably already got all the money in the world. They just want to build, they want to scale it even more. But they, that kind of doesn't always work for the bigger companies. That said, if you're just starting out, you're working with smaller companies, 100% that is the best way to go about it, is the emotional side of it. Going back to that quote, if you like, buy with emotion, justify with logic. So we've gone from the digging phase, if you like, the kind of where you want to dig and see what their business is doing, the numbers and all that kind of stuff. Then we move on to the emotional aspect of it. Now we can go with the logical aspect of it, which is, you know, this is where they can start justifying with logic. And what I personally do within the logical phase of the meeting is this is where I explain the service. This is where I show them step by step how I'm actually gonna generate them that extra 50, 100 grand a month, whatever it is, right? This is where I start explaining kind of the numbers side of it and physically how I'm gonna do it. And then that's where they can then justify it with logic, because I've kind of touched on the emotional side of it. So that side of their, you know, their brain is perfect, that they're happy with that. Now they need to justify with logic. So then that's when I go into explaining physically how I'm actually gonna generate them that extra 50, 100 grand a month. Now, and only now at this point, this is where you can start to transition into actually finishing off the deal, actually closing the deal. You know, once you've kind of done all those initial phases, you know, you can now go in for the close and kind of, you know, if you like, go in for the kill. And this is where you know, state your price, state the agreement that you want to do. If you do 3-month minimums, like I highly recommend everybody does, you state the 3-month minimum, you state your price per month, you state the ad spend, that your minimum ad spend. For those of you that don't know, I highly recommend that you you know, give their client the freedom of exactly how much they want to spend in terms of ad spend, but you know, you will always want to make sure that you have a minimum in mind and they don't just say $100 a month, because obviously everybody knows you can't generate any good results with a low ad spend. So for me personally, my lowest I'd go is, I mean, technically I'd go down to maybe 1,000, but really you want 1,500, 2,000 to be your minimum ad spend, especially for e-commerce. That's a super broad overview of sales and kind of how I structure my strategy, if you like. Obviously, once again, you know, going back to what I mentioned before, the people in my 4-week mentorship program get my sales script, and within that sales script, you know, that's those 4 kind of overarching ideas and 4 overarching phases are kind of trickled throughout. So you just follow that script and you're hitting all those even if you don't know it. But as I say, I'm at the point now personally where I don't use a script anymore, like, you know, word for word, like reading line by line, like I did when I started out. You know, you need to go through that, because otherwise you will never get to a point like where you don't need the script. So I started out, but as I say, now I'm at the point where I don't use a script, but I'm still thinking in my head those 4 phases, like I mentioned, those 4 phases. I'm always trying to hit those 4 phases within my sales. So depending on where you're at, I highly recommend you follow a script, or if you're more advanced, then obviously just always keep those 4 phases in mind. And if you do and you're constantly trying to hit them all the time, you can't really go wrong in your selling. Then it's more up to the client as opposed to yourself. Once you leave it up to the client, you know, once you leave it in the client's hands, then it's just a matter of finding the right people. Once you've styled down your sales and you know that at the end of every sales meeting that you have, you've done the best sales strategy you can do, and you leave it up to the client's hands, then it's kind of, you're at a good point, because as I say, going back to what I said before, you know, then it comes down to finding the right people, and that's the easier part of an agency and getting clients. That's the easier part, as opposed to actually figuring out what works and what doesn't. I hope that helps. I hope that gives you a little bit more context as to how I go about structuring my sales, how you should definitely go about structuring your own as well. Once again, if you did enjoy the video, please leave a like and a comment. Really does help out with the channel. And yeah, I will see you in the next video.